Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report today. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and let's get right to today's top stories. Clashes over vaccine mandates continue across the country. Employees in public and private sectors are protesting and filing lawsuits to push back. With vaccine mandates across the country quickly approaching, we speak to a U.S. Congressman about these mandates, and we also talk to him about his recent visit to the southern border. And two Senate Democrats push back on the carbon tax proposed in President Biden's energy reform agenda, hinting that adjustments are needed if they're going to get a new climate law through Congress. Clashes over vaccine mandates continue across the country. Public servants across the nation are facing unemployment if they choose not to take the vaccine. In Chicago, more than 1/3 of Chicago police officers did not report their vaccination status by the deadline last Friday. They were sent home without pay and could face disciplinary action. In Connecticut, healthcare system Yale New Haven Health fired nearly 100 workers over the vaccination requirements. Protests against vaccine mandates in the private sector have been held in several different states. Employees from Southwest Airlines and Northrop Grumman are among workers from major U.S. corporations who are protesting the vaccine mandates. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas tested positive Tuesday for the CCP virus and is self-isolating at home. The secretary has been fully vaccinated. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell died of the CCP virus this Monday. According to a statement made by his family, Powell was also fully vaccinated against the CCP virus, which causes COVID-19. Wyoming state lawmakers say they will hold a special session next week to push back against President Biden's vaccine mandate. They will discuss two bills being drafted. One would ban vaccine passports and impose a $500,000 fine for firing employees based on vaccination status. The other bill aims at public servants trying to enforce federal vaccine mandates. They may face fines and a prison sentence. But even if approved and signed into law by the governor, such bills may lack legal standing. The U.S. Constitution prohibits state statutes from superseding federal law. About 24 service members have joined in a class action lawsuit against the Pentagon over its vaccine mandates. The 24 plaintiffs claim the federal vaccine mandate, quote, violates their sincerely held religious beliefs, and that they have been refused any religious exemption or accommodation. The lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court in Florida. It lists President Biden, Secretary of Defense Austin, and Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas as the defendants. The plaintiffs are asking the court to issue a temporary restraining order to prevent the COVID-19 vaccine mandates from taking effect and ultimately issue an injunction. The mandate deadlines for active duty service members will mostly come into effect in November. Military members failing to comply will face suspensions or other disciplinary actions. With many vaccine mandates coming into effect throughout the country in the coming weeks, and the situation on the southern border still posing major problems, we had a chance to sit down with Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs to get his take. Congressman Andy Biggs, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Steve, good to be with you.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the vaccine mandates. Many of these deadlines are coming due, federal mandates in November. Where do you see this heading?
Well, so the Biden administration is trying to do an OSHA rule very quickly through an emergency process. So there really is no formal OSHA rule yet, which is why I have legislation pending. But it's also why what you're going to see in the Senate, I hope, is an effort to defund that portion of OSHA that would enforce a vaccine mandate. It's possible that they can get that done because it doesn't. They don't need even the full 50. We'll see if that happens. It's an uphill climb. So I think you're going to continue to see a fight in the American public. You're going to see a fight in Congress, and I think you're going to continue to see the states fight it as well. Certain states, and they should, because this is an unconstitutional mandate.
I want to ask you, you touched upon pushback. There's a lot of military folks. You know, we only have a few thousand Navy SEALs. A lot of people don't know that. And many of them are going to be forced to take the vaccine or lose their, their careers. What do you think this is going to potentially do to our military readiness?
Well, I think it's going to be detrimental. I think people who are qualified that we would otherwise say we want this kind of individual to join the military, I think they're going to start staying away because you're already seeing people leaving. I am contacted regularly in my district by long-term military folks who are saying, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. I refuse. I'm going to separate. That's bad news for us because it takes out experienced, capable individuals who we have spent literally, in some cases, millions of dollars training. And we're saying, you know what, you may be young, healthy, and vibrant. Maybe you even have natural immunity. Maybe you have some kind of religious desire to stay away, or maybe you just simply, maybe your doctor thinks you shouldn't get it. Think of how many people, like on the Border Patrol, how many of these Border Patrol agents are going to separate? I've been told it could be as many as 5,000. And if that many were to leave, as porous as our border already is, you truly have a national security crisis along your border.
Now, it's not just the Navy SEALs. We're hearing information, obviously, it's been in the news along with Southwest, folks from Northrop Grumman, engineers, the people that build our military. You know, there's a lot of defense contractors in Florida on the Space Coast that are up against, you know, no choice mandates. And these are the people that build our military in a different way.
No, that's exactly right. So I have got a lot of defense contractors in my district. I mean, I've got Northrop in my district. I've got Boeing. I've got a whole host of others. And they are in danger of losing some incredibly skilled individuals. And those skilled individuals will find another place to go because they are engineers, they're bright, they're capable, they're creative, they have the skills. I mean, the secondary and tertiary impacts don't go for just the military soldier or sailor or airman who's out there. They go to and disrupt and ripple through the entire, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. It will ripple throughout all of that. And it's one way to do what I think the Biden and the leftists would like to do, and they would like to emasculate our military, and I think this is evidence of that.
Congressman Biggs, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
A Republican lawmaker has said thousands of migrants are coming through Panama on their way to the U.S. right now as we speak, and that Panama has apprehended 52 people associated with the terror group Al-QAEDA. Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas recently met with Panama's foreign minister to discuss the ongoing migrant crisis. The foreign minister said Panama has seen a spike in migrant passings from 800 a month to 20,000. Congressman Gonzalez spoke on the Real America podcast.
But I asked her one specific question. Have you caught anybody on the terrorist watch list? And she goes, funny you ask that, Tony, because in Panama, we do biometrics, and we have apprehended 52 people that have been associated with Al-QAEDA.
And a Panama diplomat said that there are more than 100,000 migrants in her country that are on their way to the U.S. right now. And President Biden's energy reform agenda might need to be adjusted, despite pushes from progressives who want an all-or-nothing deal on climate. Two Democrat senators say they oppose the carbon tax. Joining us to break down the latest developments, NTD's Melina Wisecup. Melina, why is the carbon tax drawing such disapproval?
Yes, Steve. So those two senators that are really opposed to this carbon tax are Senator Jon Tester and Senator Joe Manchin. Now, what a carbon tax is, it would place a government fee on each ton of greenhouse gas that polluters emit. Senator Jon Tester says that he's against this because he just doesn't think it'll work the way it's explained to him. So while Senator Joe Manchin says it's completely off the board and it's just not up for discussion at all. But the White House says they're not taking it off the table. And we heard from a group of Congress members who are environmentalists here today on Capitol Hill. They're really rallying behind this carbon tax as well as many other clean energy initiatives.
As we look at this bill in the final hours of negotiation, we can't cut funding for natural climate solutions like protecting old growth forests.
Where can we get the most bang for the buck? And mobile emissions, reducing those, industrial emissions, reducing those, and emissions coming from power plants. And that's a big part, that's the centerpiece of what we're doing.
And Senator Manchin has long been opposed to this radical climate agenda. He's pushing for natural gas to be included in this energy plan, and he said eliminating fossil fuels is not the way to go.
Yeah, Steve. So one reason why Senator Manchin says that, he says it's not going to make much of a difference on the global scale. Now, the reason why he says that is because there are other countries who are bigger polluters, such as China. China is one of the biggest polluters around the globe. So Senator Manchin's stance and many others who are kind of against this radical energy reform are saying that it's not going to make much of a difference what we do here in America. But what we did hear from some of the lawmakers on Capitol Hill today is that they really think that America should be setting an example. Now, whether or not other countries will follow that example, now that's up to them. Steve?
And President Biden is desperate to get these two extremes of the Democratic Party on the same page. This week, Biden held meetings at the White House with both groups separately to help with negotiations. Melina, what can you tell us about those meetings?
Yeah, Steve. So President Biden did meet with a large group of lawmakers at the White House last night, including some progressives, and it looks like they are getting closer to a deal here, but it is cut in half. So the Democrats originally asked for $3.5 trillion for this budget bill. Now it's looking somewhere around $2 trillion. That means that a wide range of programs will have to be cut. Whether or not that will include climate programs, it's still up in the air. Details on how many programs or which programs they're cutting are still not officially out in the open yet, but what it's looking like is free community college will be cut out of this budget bill, as well as immigration reform. Now, immigration reform is something that the Democrats have pushed strongly for to include. They've went to the Senate Rules Advisor twice, and they've been denied twice. So it's unlikely that they'll be able to include immigration in this particular budget bill. Now, as I said, details are scarce, and we will continue to follow those details. Senators and President Biden are really hoping to meet a deal somewhere by the end of the week. Steve?
And coming up, former President Donald Trump sues House politicians investigating the U.S. Capitol January 6th protest and the National Archives. With the deep divides across the country, we speak to the author of a new book, American Schism, to see how we might be able to find common ground. President Joe Biden delivers remarks in support of human rights around the world, and activists call on him to hold the world's largest abuser of human rights accountable, China. The Texas legislature approved a redrawn map of congressional districts on Monday. The new map redistributes districts and reflects a decade of population change in the state. The new maps include merging of diverse urban and predominantly white rural regions. Democrats criticize the map for not including additional districts where blacks or Hispanics make up a majority of voters. State Senator Joan Huffman, who leads the Senate Redistricting Committee, argued that it was drawn blind to race. Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign them into law. Two more longtime Democratic congressmen announced that they will not be seeking re-election. On Monday, two longtime Democratic congressmen, David Price of North Carolina and Mike Doyle of Pennsylvania, announced that they would be retiring. Both had been elected to the House in the mid-90s. Last week, House Budget Committee Chairman Rep. John Yarmuth said he'll be retiring and won't seek re-election either. Yarmuth was elected in 2006. According to the Cook Political Report, Price, Doyle, and Yarmuth are all considered safe Democrat seats. They're not expected to be competitive in 2022. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy predicted there will be more Democrat retirements ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. With the country facing an unprecedented level of divisiveness, we've been looking for answers on how to have a healthy discourse. One person we thought might have some answers is author of a new book called American Schism. Here's part of our interview with author Seth David Radwell. Seth David Radwell, author of American Schism. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. Now, the title of your book, American Schism, schism implies a divide. Right now, I think most people would agree that America feels like it is more divided than ever. How does your book address this?
Well, the book is an investigative tracing of how we got so divided today and why we are where we are. And it turns out that the original American Schism happened way back in our founding, when our founding fathers had differing visions, contending visions for what America should be about. And so what was amazing to me in my research as I wrote this book was just how much our history is helpful to really understand the roots, the antecedents of our divisions.
Now, in your book, American Schism, you present a new vision for America, and how would you propose bridging our differences?
That's a great question. So after the book goes through in great detail and explaining these different visions, it talks about how we come together. And I would say, Lance, there are two major categories of recommendations. One set is structural things that need to change, and the other are more mindset things. And that's maybe the most important for a second, because we can't keep talking to each other over Twitter. We have to have real conversations and get different perspectives to solve problems. Over the course of our history, we've always had disagreements. But if you examine it carefully, when we talked to each other and compromised, we had much better solutions.
Now, there's always been contention, there's always been periods of extreme disagreement. Do you think that this period that we're in right now is any different than in previous times?
I think we've had other periods of great division. What scares me the most about this period is that it seems over the last few years, many Americans have given up on the pursuit of objective truth, because there's so much information out there that they give up even trying to know what's objective, and that's dangerous. So I think it's really important to get information from different sources to see what's out there. You know, back in the 18th century, they didn't have TV, but they had different points of view, often in pamphlets, like Thomas Paine's famous Common Sense. And it was important for people to get different perspectives on issues.
So it sounds like one of the solutions that you're alluding to would be critical thinking.
Absolutely. And that's based on education. So, we used to teach, when I was a kid, civics in school. And we taught kids how to differentiate an argument and how to compare evidence. I think we still do that, but to some degree, those civic skills have been crowded out by science, technology, and math, which is important too, of course. The radical enlighteners understood that to have a democracy, you needed an educated populace. And it's not an easy form of government. It takes work, but it's superior. And in the book in American Schism, I discuss why. But one of the reasons it's superior, in an autocratic government, decrees are handed down and you follow them. In a democracy, the whole premise is to listen to each other and talk to each other. But you can't only scream at each other. You have to understand the perspectives.
Seth David Radwell, thank you. Former President Donald Trump is filing a lawsuit against the Democratic-led House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol breach and against the National Archives. Trump has cited executive privilege to keep his presidential records classified. His court filing argues that the records requested by the House Select January 6th committee is too broad and doesn't serve any legislative purpose. The lawsuit also calls the investigation a vexatious, illegal fishing expedition.
Look, the January 6th Commission, from the beginning, it has admitted that it is not about the legislative efforts of the Congress. What they have done is made it clear it's a show trial that's meant to damage President Trump.
This lawsuit comes days after the White House press secretary told reporters that the Biden administration would not allow Trump to use executive privilege to block investigation requests.
I think if you look back at past presidents, Democratic and Republican, there isn't really a precedent for what we're talking about with this select committee and what they're trying to get to the bottom of. And the uniqueness of that, I think, is important context.
If I was Joe Biden, I would be thinking to myself, do I really want to put in place waivers of all executive privilege? There's a national security component. There's just a management component. How do you run a business if your competitors can look at what you're doing in every meeting? So there's a balance.
The National Archives is reportedly scheduled to hand over the Trump administration documents next month. President Biden previously cleared those documents for release. And the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol breach has voted to hold the conservative podcast host and former Trump aide Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress. President Joe Biden recently made a speech highlighting the ongoing human rights abuses around the globe. Advocates suggest the Biden administration hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for its atrocious human rights violations.
I've raised these issues personally with leaders around the world, our friends and adversaries alike, and I made it clear that no U.S. president should stand by when human rights are under attack and maintain their legitimacy.
President Biden recently spoke at the Dodd Center for Human Rights. It was named after a Nuremberg prosecutor who convicted Nazis of war crimes after World War II. On Monday, human rights advocates also highlighted the Chinese Communist regime's horrible crimes of organ harvesting.
The Chinese government is an organized criminal enterprise. It's now selling the organs of its own people.
Dr. Sean Lin says that Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience were treated as an organ farm by the communist regime. Their blood type and tissue information are collected when they're in custody, and then the regime would make profit by harvesting their organs for transplant on demand.
And make profit from this whole process.
Experts also suggest that the U.S. government should more actively use the Global Magnitsky Act to hold those human rights perpetrators accountable. And Amazon will hire 150,000 seasonal delivery workers nationwide. There will be about 3,700 seasonal jobs in Virginia and 2,600 in Maryland. The jobs have an average starting pay of $18 per hour, with another $3 per hour depending on the shifts for certain locations. Amazon currently has about 56,000 employees in Maryland and Virginia. D.C. commuters depending on the Metro train will experience significant delays, as the Metro Rail's reduced service pattern will continue throughout the weekend. This slashed train service is because investigators are probing the derailment of a 700 series Blue Line car. All of these types of rail cars, which make up about 60% of the Metro's rail car fleet, need to be checked out for a wheel defect that caused the October 12th derailment. Metro officials say that the trains will not return to service until they are deemed safe. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you next time.